My research about Lampedusa wants to be an example of how to study movement, mobility, migration and tourism. So by choosing one space where to see various cases of mobility, the research aims at understanding how the various levels interplay. So we have the political, the institutional, but mostly the local populations and the tourists and the migrants' activities when they encounter or if they encounter each other. I'm an Eritreanist. I work especially on Eritrean diaspora. So on the 3rd of October 2013, I was very touched by the shipwreck of 500, mostly Eritrean, a few Syrians, but mostly Eritreans, out of whom 368 died at sea after the migrants burnt a piece of cloth, because they were very close to the island. They were practically 1 mile away from La Spiaggia dei Conigli. So they thought to make a fire so that people could see them. But then everybody got very scared and started moving towards one part of the boat, and so the boat capsized. And it was night, and it was difficult for them to be rescued straight away. Obviously, this example initiates a variety of types of analysis on why migrants, especially from Eritrea, because that's my key study, why did they risk their lives? How did they arrive there? So who helps them? And what happens when they get to Lampedusa, dead or alive? And then on the 3rd of October, not on the 3rd of October, in October, TripAdvisor also rated the Spiaggia dei Conigli, the same place where they shipwrecked, as the most beautiful beach in the world. And that that intrigued me, and I thought that these two parallels had to meet up in some way. It was a coincidence to be analysed, because it was very intense, that the kind of contradictory types of movements that were happening exactly in the same place. So that's the beginning of this story.
And how do the locals experience the migrants?
There are time has changed encounters. So before 2011, migrants would arrive, and there was some sorts of centres, but they were really primitive, and especially in 2011, there was the whole migration from the African Spring, the Arab Spring. So they had thousands, between 35,000 and 50,000, the numbers say, of migrants living on the island. And the island has a maximum of 6,000 inhabitants. So there weren't 40,000 migrants all at once, but in the arc of 4 months, that's the number they had to host. And there are beautiful stories and tense stories about that period. It was the beginning of how Lampedusa became associated with clandestine migration and emergency. From that moment onwards, after the government failed to assist the island, obviously, because 3 months in this situation was appalling, they started to institutionalize migration and to hide it. So practically now, migrants arrive. They arrive in a specific part of the port that is unaccessed, nobody can access. Even the boats, the rescuing boats, are placed. They are in the middle of they're very visible. The whole apparatus is very visible. but it has no way of interacting with the local population. And once migrants land, they are straight away put on a bus if they are healthy, or an ambulance if they're not. And they are brought to the camp. So the only way for local people to see this is to go at the end of the ramp of the port and to wave at the migrants while they leave. So this is how I would describe this encounter as an impossible encounter, because it's so institutionalized. Once they get to the camp, they're enclosed in the camp, and so they're trying to make sure that migration is visible but invisible. So it's visible in a sense that's so institutionalized that it seems under control, but then is impossible to touch, to feel for the local population, who was used to instead engage with people coming from all over the world, the Mediterranean. So yeah, it's probably changing. It has a very strong impact on the island, who has to change its identity in a way.
You said many migrants come from Eritrea. We all know that. Can you tell us a bit about the ties between Italy and Eritrea?
So Eritrea and Italy never had a post-colonial reflection. So the ties that's my point of view, is that the ties that linked Eritrea as a colony and Italy as a colonial power never completely, they were never abolished and rephrased and analysed and criticised and so on. When Italy left Eritrea, it left some kind of economy, a very small number of investors and business enterprises. Nowadays, Italy has never been involved politically, say during the Badme War in between 98 and 2000. Italy had the maps, because Italy drew the borders between Eritrea and Ethiopia during the colonial stay, and but that's the border that Eritrea was claiming. So Badme is this little village between Tigray and Eritrea. So Italy could have brought out the maps, the official maps, to stop the war or to create a peace treaty, but they never did. There's no interest in contributing politically in the Horn of Africa. Nevertheless, economically they are very present. So we heard about a cotton factory, for instance, that was bought by an Italian businessman for $1, and then from that cotton factory, it was a cotton factory from the colonial period, he then started producing cotton for Armani, Frette, all the cotton industries in Italy. So Eritrea has been criticized for internationally by the UN, by experts of Eritrea and journalists and activists because of especially because of this national service that is indefinite. So by the age of 17, when students or young people finish school, the last few years of school will be already part of the national service, and then they will become militaries. But militaries in a state of non-war does not mean becoming, being prepared for war. but it means just working for the state. So it's a labor force. The Eritrean state has nationalized everything, so the national service produces all the work that is necessary for the state. So this cotton factory has a liaison with the state. It's actually officially connected. So it is very easy to think that they are using this enslaved national service supply. So that's what I was, shocked that the Italians would not contribute to a critique of the Eritrean system, but obviously finding out these stories makes you wonder if they have interest in everything continuing. Recent research is suggesting that the Eritrean state has interest in leaving the borders a bit porous so that people exit. And there are researchers that actually suggest that there is an industry on human trafficking by the generals and the elite of Eritreans in sponsoring and gaining from the flight of people. So yeah, that's one of the issues that we encountered while working on. The tourist industry in Lampedusa is very stable because it includes people who have been going there for years, or it's a mass tourism that kind of is quite continuous. There was a big crisis in 2011 because the island was completely filled with migrants. So they had squatted an entire area. There was no water supply, no toilets, so you can imagine how bad that was. And so that did produce a trope of Lampedusa is the island of clandestine migration. So that 1 year they had a really deep crisis in tourism. Straight away the year after, everything seemed to be normalized. Nevertheless, it is a great source of anxiety because they don't know until the end how many tourists will turn up. There are a variety of realities on the island, and obviously depending on the cultural background, the interests, and so on. But migration is always part of the island's trope, obviously, because it's the new reality, even though it's so detached from their day-to-day life. Yeah.